Genesis 22, verses 1 to 19. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, "Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. Then God said, "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain that I will show you." Early the next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey, while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you." Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the 2 of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, "Father." "Yes, my son," Abraham replied. "The wood and the fire are here," Isaac said, "but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And the 2 of them went on together. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord cried out to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. "Do not lay a hand on the boy," he said. "Do not do anything to him. Now I know you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." Abraham looked up, and there in the thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the place, "The Lord will provide." And to this day it is said, "On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided." The angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven a second time and said, "I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring all nations on earth will be blessed, because you have obeyed me." Then Abraham returned to his servants, and they set off together for Beersheba, and Abraham stayed in Beersheba.
If you were to jump in your car this afternoon and go round to Hampton Court, one thing you must see is the Great Hall. I don't know if you've been there. You enter the Great Hall, pictures on the screen, and you see these massive timbers that make a fantastic roof, and then your eyes drop and you see all the real treasures. Around the walls, there are 6 of 10 tapestries that were made. It's on the next screen. Here's one that you can see. Back in the 16th century, get this, £2,000. That's a lot of money. £2,000 were given to Belgian tapestry makers, and this was the remit. King Henry VIII, he wanted to show off, he wanted to flex his financial muscle, he wanted to impress people when they came into the Great Hall. He had 10 massive tapestries made. Each one is larger than the screen that you're looking at. Each one is over 40 meters square, and they would have taken 2 years to make, and a vast army of tapestry makers. They would have been so overwhelming as you went into the Great Hall that you would have been impressed with the wealth, with the stature, with the greatness, with the grandeur of King Henry VIII. That was the whole point of their creation. It was shock and awe, but with tapestries being the weaponry. Now, the picture you're looking at depicts our passage this morning. We're at the epoch, we're at the high point of the life of Abraham. Genesis chapter 22 is not only the most famous of all the incidences in his life, this story is generally acknowledged as the best told stories in the whole of ancient literature. And we've got 25 minutes to look at it. Here we go. 3 titles: The Call, the Test, the Lamb. The Call, the Test, and the Lamb. Here's the call. Look at verse 2 with me, Genesis 22. Then God said, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about. Now, if you've been with us since the beginning, since Genesis 11, you remember, I hope, in Genesis 12, there was this defining moment in the life of Abraham when God spoke to him and made these great, grand promises. Abraham, you're a daddy. I'm going to change your name to represent the fact that you're going to be Abraham. You're going to be a big daddy. You're going to be the father of nations. Yes, but my wife is barren. Don't worry about that. Go to the place that I will tell you about. And remarkably, in Genesis 12:4, there's this short sentence that is so profoundly important to the whole of the Bible story that it says, Abraham obeyed and went. It's a remarkable thing that he left behind so much of his security, so much of his social status, so much of what was familiar. Go back and read, please, Genesis 12, 1-3. It's there on the screen. But Abraham had this great command upon his life, and he was called to go. I want you to trust me. I know Jack Bauer used to say that a lot. I know that Tom Cruise says that a lot in each and every film. But God said to Abraham, I want you to trust me and leave what's familiar, leave behind what's comfortable, have in the rearview mirror what's stable, and I want you to go. And Abraham went. But that wasn't all. Do you remember it said in Genesis 12, just like it says in Genesis 22, verse 2, not just I want you to go, he says, I want you to go to a place and I'll tell you later where you're heading. Just go, and I want you to trust me. Verse 2 of Genesis 22. I want you to go to the region of Moriah, or one of the mountains I'll tell you about later. I will tell you about. I just want you to go, not knowing where you're going, but I want you to trust me. And these chapters, Genesis 12, Genesis 22, are kind of like bookends on the life of Abraham. But also Genesis 22 is the focus, and it's the high point. That's not all. It's not just obedience. It's not just going, not knowing where you're going to head. But there's something else as well. Go to a place that I will show you later. But notice verse 2. Go to a place that I will tell you about. But what is he asked to do there? Sacrifice your son, your only son, the son who you love. I want you to obey me. I want you to leave your security and go to a place that I will tell you about. And I want you to leave a place of security, to go to a place I will show you, and I want you to sacrifice your son, who happens to be the son of promise that you've been waiting for so long, at least 25 years. I want you to offer up. I want you to not hold anything back. I want you to leave the place of safety, of status, to leave behind what your culture says is most valuable and most important, and I want you to offer up your one and only beloved son of promise, Isaac. Now remember, if you look back into Genesis 21, there's some very similar language. Genesis 21 verse 14. Early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He sent them off with the boy. She went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. In Genesis 21, we've got Ishmael being sent out into uncertainty, sent out into desperation and need, sent out into concern and barrenness of the desert. And the very same wording is used in Genesis 22, verse 3. Early the next morning, Abraham got up and saddled his donkey. So both of his sons are under great danger and peril. God says, take your only son whom you love. He's not just rubbing it in when he says your only son. This means his only one who's left, the son of promise. Ishmael has already gone into the desert. He's already sent him away because he mocked Isaac, the son of laughter. But now we have Isaac. Isaac is not just his only son who's left behind. Isaac is the key, the cornerstone, not just socially, but to his prosperity and to his future security. in Isaac, he's the one who would have all the toys. Yeah, Isaac would have almost all of the family inheritance. Isaac was the eldest and the firstborn, so he was the one who would be responsible not just for his own safety and security, but for the safety and security of his whole family. And as we've seen, Abraham and the matriarch Sarah, they were leading a massive caravan of people. We saw last week that the core issue was that Isaac had become the emotional center for his parents, for Abraham and Sarah. And just to press the point once again, go to a place I'll tell you where it is later, and then offer up what is most valuable and of most importance, of most security to you, of most social status to you, all your hopes and dreams. I want you to offer up that son of promise. And you've got to think God is crazy to ask Abraham and Sarah to do this. And then we've read the narrative, and Abraham has the courage in God's promises and trust in his character to actually do it. And let's just take a step back. Friends, whether you're here this morning and you classify yourself as a Christian or not, as religious or not, as we've seen throughout this narrative, everybody has someone or something that they have and hold on to dearly in their hearts, that their life orbits around, like the planets orbit around the sun in our solar system. Everyone has something or someone that they have already or that they're working to obtaining that is of central importance to them. That if I have that, if I keep this, if I lose that, my world would come crushing down. But if I have this, it would be the security that I've always hoped for. It would be the identity that I fear gets eroded in lots of other ways. If I have this, if I can keep hold of this, if I can keep this family together and it feels like it's fracturing apart, this alone would be the source of my joy. This would be the source of approval that I can find nowhere else. All of us has something as certain and as definite as that we have and we want to hold on to, that we'd give anything for, or it's something that we're longing for and we're still searching for. And here we have the source of significance, identity, cultural approval that is now under threat from God's request. Remember, a working definition of God in our society would be this: the non-negotiable in your life. That's your God. Everything else can go, but I would die on the hill, literally, pun intended for this passage, to protect this thing or this person or this pot of money and so on. Friends, a lot of us have problems with the claims of the biblical God. We say, I will follow Jesus until. I will follow God unless. I will follow God as long as he doesn't ask me to forgo this, to let go of that, and so on. You fill in the gap. It could be a relationship, it could be a success that we think will give us more than what God can give us, and so on. If you are following God conditionally, as long as he doesn't, if only, you're not following the God of the Bible. That's the challenge from the call that we've heard that God has repeatedly given to Abraham and to Sarah. Leave your ifs and your onlys, your buts, your maybes. If you have any clause that you're putting into your obedience to the God of the Bible, you're not following the God of the Bible. He's bigger than our wildest dreams, and his requests and his commands have to define our obedience, not our clauses define our obedience to him. Unless you're willing to say to the God of Abraham, I will leave. I will go out not knowing where I'm going. I will leave behind. I will change my identity. Then you are not following the God of the Bible. I don't know if you like shopping. I passionately do not like shopping. But this picture on the screen could sum up our lives. Our lives are like comparison shopping. Not today, of course, but I'm the sort of guy that buys jumpers in the middle of the year because you get them cheaper and so on, but that's who I am. You hold up 2 items of clothing. It's getting into autumn, the new colors are out, and you want to compare which is the best deal. I know I've got 15 jumpers already, but these look great. And so which one am I going to choose, or do I have both? All of life, friends, is comparison shopping. Is God going to come through on his promises? Is he worth following? Is what he offers of greater standing and purpose and security than what I can get over here in the world? Because the world is so shiny. It's so present. It looks like it offers everything my heart desires. But God has an uncanny, kind, grace-saturated way of showing us whatever our foundations are, they're like sandburrs in the beach. And then suffering comes. And then whatever we've placed our hope in, our looks, our fitness, our fashion, our resources, our family, whatever it is, our health, in comes the sea of his grace. And he exposes our foundations. He's done that with Abraham again and again. Friends, that's the essence of the call. To have our foundations exposed, and any foundation other than the promises of King Jesus will always let you down and will always be swept away by the sea of suffering and the sea of time and the sea of disillusionment and so on. It's the essence of the call to hear God's voice and to respond in faith. And then in comes the sandpaper of suffering, the sandpaper of life, and maturity comes. And we see the essence of the call in saying, I will hold nothing back, but I'll step out in faith and I will go, not know where I'm going, and I'm prepared to offer up everything in my life because you are worthy of following. That's the call. But the call that we all receive is not found in this passage. This is unique. Praise God. This is unique in the call that Abraham hears. And it's the call with something that, the passage that many people have wrestled deeply over the centuries of the church. So let's think about the test, having thought about the call, the test. Historically, people have looked at this passage and it's been the deal breaker with following God. How could the God of the Bible ask Abraham to murder his son? That's one of the objections to this passage. Some people have looked at the horror of this passage and thought, God has asked so much of Abraham already. How on earth, what sort of God would dare ask Abraham to do this? And they've wrestled and thought, why is this passage in the Bible? It should just be removed. This passage, by the way, is also in the Quran. It's also in the Torah. And so it's a very significant passage across the majority world religions that we have. However, in the last 25, 30 years or so, scholars have looked at this passage in a slightly different way that I think is profoundly helpful. Let's just listen in to some thoughts that they've got. First of all, notice God does not tell Abraham to murder his son. Think of that objection. Isn't this a story of murder? Well, no, it's not. If God was to say, I want you to do the most outrageous thing I can think of, I know you've been waiting so long for Isaac to come, but I would like you to murder him. If God was to ask Abraham to do that, which he wouldn't do, why didn't Abraham just walk into his tent and take his life while he was sleeping? That's not what he asked for. Verse 2, once again, please. Genesis 22. God calls to Abraham, does not say murder your son. He says, offer him up as an offering. That's really important. Here's the second thing that's very important from modern scholarship, and that is the significance of God asking Abraham to offer up his firstborn. Now, that's a big deal. In modern Western society and culture, we do not understand this. Our hopes and dreams are about us. Our hopes and dreams are about success. We want to do whatever we can to make our name for ourselves, to make 1 million, to increase the amount of people we influence. We want to not be forgotten, and so we will do whatever it takes to be a success. If I could just find an easy way, if I could just find a life hack. There are very few hacks in life, by the way. But if I could just find a life hack, if I could just cut a corner, then I would be able to make a name for myself. Friends, simply put, we live in an individualistic society. Abraham lived in a family society, and that's a massive difference. In a family society, the I does not matter as much as the family. It's all about what's best for the family. So the firstborn was a big deal. In the time of Abraham, there were no slogans like, be the change you want to see. There was no slogans like, you do you. It's all about what's best for the family. And the firstborn was of absolute primary importance. There wasn't individualistic thinking. It was always about the family. When it came to inheritance, as I've said already, if you had 2 kids, 4 kids, 12 kids, it doesn't matter. There was not an equal division of inheritance. The firstborn got almost all of it. And with the responsibility and the privilege of being the firstborn, they had the responsibility of caring for the family, of caring for their elderly parents, of providing. The firstborn had so much to do. The firstborn was the ultimate hope of the family. Think of it like that. No pressure in the room if you're the firstborn. But in many passages through the Bible, God comes head to head with the culture and says, the life of the firstborn is mine. The life of the firstborn is mine. It doesn't matter if it's the firstborn of the cattle. The firstborn of the cattle is mine. It doesn't matter if it's the first fruits of the grain. The first fruits of the grain of your harvest, that's mine. And it certainly doesn't matter if it's the firstborn of cattle or offspring. That's mine as well. The primary passage you see this is in Exodus chapter 13. In Exodus 13, it's the story of God bringing judgment on the Egyptians who have been terrible taskmasters and have abused the Israelites who they've used as slave labor. God says, I'm going to bring down my judgment on the Egyptians. You've oppressed and enslaved my people. And the firstborn life is forfeit in every Egyptian home. But not only in every Egyptian home, in every Jewish home as well. Unless you take blood and paste it around the door frame, you will lose the life of your firstborn. It's there throughout the Bible. It's in passages like Exodus 22. This is on the screen. On Numbers 3, Numbers 8. Throughout the Bible, God is saying, the life of the firstborn, of your crops, of your animals, and of your own family, they are mine. Unless you redeem it, unless a sacrifice is made, unless there's a payment, the firstborn is mine. In other words, unless we understand that principle, we will always miss the point of Genesis chapter 22. Abraham understood it. The people of the time understood it. Recent scholarship has shone a big helpful light upon this. Because when God said, take your son, your only son, and offer him up as a burnt offering, it's a 4,000-year-old way of saying this. The firstborn life of your family is forfeit. It belongs to me. And unless it's redeemed, I will take that life. Because there's a debt of sin that every family owes me. This makes no sense to us, but it would have made all the sense in the world to Abraham, because our cultures are so different. Think about it this way. If God had come to Abraham and said, go into your tent and kill Sarah, then I'll know that you love me. Abraham would never have done it. He would have thought he's hallucinating because of too much pork and cheese. But why did he get up straight away, make preparations? Verse 3, early the next morning and so on. Why did he cut the wood? And when that was ready, he got on his donkey and went. Why was there no objection? Because verse 2, Abraham, offer up your firstborn. Abraham understood what God was asking him. That's the point. Abraham knew what all the ancient Hebrews knew, that there's a God of justice who can't overlook sin. And in a family-orientated society, he knew giving up your firstborn was the way that God called in the debt. It's an Old Testament way of saying what's said in the New Testament, no one is righteous, no, not one. There's a debt of sin to pay that everybody has to pay. And so verse 2, offer up your son Isaac. Abraham realized God's calling in his debt. And now we can see the force, the horror, the magnitude of the verses that Chris led us into at the start of the service. Hebrews 11, by faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered up Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had received the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, it's through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. Here's the problem. like those two impenetrable mountains we saw before. The command of God apparently contradicts the promises of God. And how will those two things be brought out of contradiction? The command of God is just. There's a debt of sin that needs to be paid. But the promise of God, Genesis 12, 1-3, is that through Isaac the whole world would be blessed. And those two truths are two impenetrable mountains that don't appear to be able to be reconciled. How can God, I'm sure Abraham thought as he walked towards the mountains of Moriah, that region, how can God be just and justifier? How can God honor his promise to bless the world through the son of promise who's walking alongside me in his early teenage years probably? And yet also, how would the debt of sin that is owed by my family and by myself be paid? How can a holy God be gracious? How can a gracious God be holy? That's the test. And then we come to the Lamb. Every commentator in this great text notices the change of pace that happens. Look down with me. Notice how fast it's going, and then notice as the narrator whacks the brakes on. Verse 2, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go. Early the next morning, Abraham got up, saddled his donkey. He took with him, and so on. Verse 4, on the third day, the pace is still quite fast. And then you get to verse 6, and the brakes get applied. Notice how, for poignancy, everything slows down, and the detail and the subtlety is brought forth with slowness of speech. Verse 6, Abraham took the wood and the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac. He's slowing down. And he himself carried the fire and the knife. Did you notice that little detail? All the dangerous stuff Abraham keeps. And notice the tenderness, verse 6, the second half. As the two of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father. Now that's the only place in the whole Bible that we hear Isaac speak. And what does he say? Verse 7, Father, slowing down again. Yes, my son. The fire and wood are here. But where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Abraham responds, verse 8, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering. Friends, what drove Abraham up the mountain? Had he just done a 5K and a 10K and he was pretty fit, in good shape? Was it obedience that drove him up the mountain? No, it wasn't. It was faith. Faith drove Abraham up the mountain. He was convinced, it says in verse 14, that God would see to it. God would do it. God would provide the lamb. What's he saying to Isaac with this great, profound question of urgency, need, desperation maybe? I don't know, Isaac. I don't know how God's going to do it, but he will. God will provide. That word in verse 8 for provide is literally to see. God will see to it. It's as if Abraham's saying, my son, you can't see the lamb for the burnt offering. My son, I can't see the lamb for the burnt offering. But God can see the lamb for the burnt offering. I don't know how God's going to do it, I think Abraham is saying. How can God be both holy and gracious? I don't know how my debt of sin is going to be paid, but he's going to do it. Because I've been taught what faith in God means over the past 25 years, where I've made a train wreck of my life, where I've lied again and again, where I've taken initiative rather than growing in faith, and yet God has preserved me, he's been gracious to me, and I see that God keeps every promise that he makes. Verse 14, on the mountain of the Lord, God will see to it. God will provide. Friends, this side of Genesis 22, as we look back, we know Abraham's little lamb, his teenage lamb, Isaac. We know that Isaac could not have paid the price of sin for his family. We know, verse 13, when a ram is seen and provided for, we know even the ram caught in the bushes, according to the book of Hebrews, the blood of bulls and goats, that doesn't atone for sin either. We know 2 Chronicles chapter 3 verse 1 It's a very interesting sentence that I've only recently noticed. It says this on the screen: Solomon began building the Lord's temple in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah. That's interesting. That means the temple that Solomon built, it means Calvary, was part of the mountains of Moriah. Why did Abraham not bring down the cleaver on his son? What was the point of this journey? Because centuries later, the Father led his beloved Son up onto the same mountains. The one and only Son was put on wood. And when the ultimate beloved child cried, my God, why have you forsaken me?" the Father paid the price for our sin in his silence. Paul, in Romans 8, verse 32, takes the truth of Genesis 22 and applies it to the work of Jesus on the cross. Paul says, "He who did not spare his own Son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also, along with him, graciously give us all things?" Here's the answer. Paul shows us that they're the only way through these two impenetrable mountains of the mercy of God and the justice of God is the cross of Jesus. It's the only possible way. On the cross, you see the justice of God and the mercy of God meet. And only there. What we've got here, why did Abraham have to make this journey? Was it to prove how much he'd learned about God's kindness and grace? Was it his obedience that drove him up the mountain? No. We have this true story, 4,000-year-old story that's in these holy books of these major world religions. We have it explained to us why the journey was necessary in the book of Romans and the book of Hebrews. Why did Abraham have to make this journey? Well, it's to help us understand what the Father did with the Son. It is to show us the journey of faith that God graciously has led Abraham through. And respectfully think about it like this. If Abraham had been at the foot of Calvary, if Abraham had been at the foot of the cross, he could have taken the words of Genesis chapter 22, verse 12, and turned them round and applied them to himself. What do I mean? He could have looked up at the Father in heaven, seeing the Son on the cross, and Abraham could have said this: "Now I know. Now I know," Abraham speaking, "that you love me because you did not withhold your son, your only son, whom you love, from me." Abraham could have said that. Friends, how do you know in a sermon with very little application? So here it is. How do you know that God loves you? How do you know that God values you? How do you know that God delights in you, approves of you? How can you know those truths so that you can rest in the security and the magnitude and the depth and the height and the width of his love for you? How can you be freed from the enslavement of people pleasing? How can you be free from the enslavement of situations and circumstances? How can you be free and liberated from these foundations that we think will take the weight of our expectations that we place upon them, but will always fail us? Because this is how much he loves you. Don't say, "I'm just going to trust Jesus. I'm going to determinedly get my way up the hill of life." Friends, by the Holy Spirit, we need to see Abraham and Isaac going up that mount, and it was a picture of the price the Father paid at Calvary. That's liberty. That's life-changing. That's heart-shaping. It doesn't just move you emotionally, it has power to change your life to the degree you understand what Christ did on the cross. You have to, from the bottom of your heart, take this verse 12 from Genesis 22 and not just see it as the high point of the life of Abraham and Sarah, where the thing they held most preciously to, the thing that they built their life around, Isaac, they were willing to offer up. "Now I know that you love me." God says to Abraham, "because you did not hold on that was most precious for you. Friends, now we can say to God, now I know that you love me because you gave your son. You did not withhold that was most precious to you, your only son whom you love, from me. Friends, when you see that, that will enable you to offer up whatever it is that you hold most preciously to right now. Now you know. Let's pray.